right after the school gets thoroughly trashed by terrorists. Our resident high-tier mob Cid is chilling in a temporary medical tent pitched in the smoking ruins of the academy. Suddenly, his self-proclaimed future wife, Princess Rose Oriana, bursts through the entrance like an absolute maniac, screaming at the top of her lungs about some wounded guy with a back injury. Naturally, this unhinged volume level completely upsets the entire tent, prompting a short-haired doctor to bark at her to shut her trap. Shaken, Rose scans the crowded, dimly lit space, before her eyes lock onto a familiar mop of messy dark hair, and she immediately tackles him in a death grip of pure relief. "Thank goodness, I'm so happy to see you alive, Cid Kagenou," she wails. Cid, who basically shrugged off a fatal wound like a pro MMO player dodging a telegraph, deadpans that he miraculously avoided death through sheer luck. Rose, completely blind to his actual identity as a god-tier shadow broker, weeps and attributes his survival to his daily physical training. Cid just tilts his head and gives the non-committal shrug, but Rose is deeply lost in her own shoujo manga fantasy, grasping his hands and claiming his passionate feelings caused this miracle, and that his love has finally reached her. Cid, fighting off a yawn, weakly plays along with her main character energy, muttering about his strong will to live, smiling like she's already planning their wedding. Rose tucks him in and tells him to rest. As he drifts off to sleep, she strokes his hair, completely convinced he's a reliable, compassionate hero. Kneeling by his cot, she makes a silent, eternal vow to give him her heart. Fast forward a few days later, and the school is still a half-ruined mess under a sunny sky. Cid's two absolute clown-tier friends are busy coping about their performance during the raid. The blonde poser, Hyoro, dramatically clutches his head, boasting that keeping his immense latent power under control took everything he had. Beside him, the short-haired nerd, Jaga, nervously sweats and claims he was too busy analyzing enemy combat patterns to actually do anything useful. Hyoro keeps spinning his fantasy protagonist lies, claiming that unleashing his true powers would have literally destroyed the world. Jaga sighs, complaining that his only weakness is getting too hyper-focused. Cid just stands there, giving them a look of absolute unimpressed disgust, translating their gamer cope as them just pissing their pants in a corner. Before Cid can escape these two basement dwellers, a soft voice calls out, and he turns to see a cute blonde girl clutching her satchel. They walk over to a quiet, ruined corner where Sherry softly thanks him for saving her life during the raid. Keeping his mob character stealth meter maxed out, Cid acts modest, claiming he didn't do much. Sherry gets intensely flustered, claiming he gave her the push she needed, before getting incredibly red and changing the subject. She dramatically announces she's studying abroad to accomplish some grand goal, since her foster dad got brutally executed by Shadow, which she thankfully doesn't know. She wants to expand her knowledge, asking if Cid will listen to her story when she returns. Cid plays the supportive background NPC, telling her good luck. Relieved, she smiles, and Cid casually asks what her grand mission is. She turns with a playful, secretive smile, calling it a secret, before waving goodbye as she runs off. Cid waves back, muttering that he won't slack off either. As her cape billows in the wind, she looks back with a hopeful smile, promising they shall meet again. Meanwhile, far away from school drama, the evening settles over a bustling town where stone buildings cast long shadows under a darkening sky. Inside a dimly lit room, Alpha is sitting elegantly on a window ledge, looking incredibly stylish in her form-fitting Shadow Garden gear, holding a piece of paper and noting that the kingdom doesn't waste any time. She turns the document toward her dark-haired elf subordinate, who gasps in sheer shock at the wanted poster. Alpha remains completely unbothered, chuckling that the flyers are actually pretty well made. She reads off the list of fabricated crimes, laughing at how Shadow is now a wanted state enemy accused of mass murder, arson, and robbery. The elf subordinate is absolutely fuming on behalf of her lord, gesturing wildly and demanding they take action to clear his name. Alpha's mind briefly drifts back to the night of the fire, recalling the blazing flames and the cult members who tried to drag their name through the dirt. Snapping back to reality, she taps her shoe and declares that they will simply shoulder all the world's sins, just like their master intended. She stands up with dramatic flair, stating that nothing changes and they will continue their mission. The subordinate is instantly starstruck by this profound, absolute masterclass in edginess, whispering that these are words to live by. Alpha quietly looks away, remembering how she once thought the Diabolos cult was pure evil, and that they were the side of justice. But she realizes Shadow's resolve is on a whole different level, and they must live up to it. Turning back, she orders her to gather the 7 shades for a briefing. The subordinate bows deeply, eager to comply, while outside a carriage races through the night toward Lindworm. Under the cover of a pitch-black night, Cid is mentally recapping his absolute win of a terrorist arc. He managed to dodge all suspicion by playing the lucky survivor card, and with the school burned to a crisp, he has a sweet vacation to focus on his mob few training. Or at least, that was the plan until a luxury carriage started rattling down a bumpy dirt road. Cid is currently trapped inside the cabin, undergoing a psychological torture session because Princess Rose is sitting right across from him. She leans forward, grabbing his hand, and starts rambling about how their meeting is a blessing of fate. She closes her eyes, dramatically sighing that their future path will be incredibly arduous. Cid stares at her with completely dead, half-lidded eyes, begging her internally to shut up about fate. The only reason he's even traveling is because Alpha sent him a cryptic, super-secret letter telling him to go to the Holy Land of Lindworm. Lindworm is basically the Vatican of this world, currently hosting a massive event called the Goddess Trial. Cid could have easily broken the sound barrier by serious dashing there at 1,200 kilometers in a single evening, but because he's committed to the mob lifestyle, he chose a slow carriage, only to get hijacked by Rose waiting at him. Now, he has to endure her constant religious rambling, making him desperately regret not just running there at supersonic speeds. Rose suddenly changes the subject, noting that something felt off about the school incident. Cid plays along, asking what she means. Rose explains that the black-clad terrorists and the real Shadow fought with completely different combat styles, meaning they belong to different factions. She warns Cid to be careful, as the kingdom's knights have no clue what they're doing. Cid gives her a low-effort grunt of agreement. Seeing her get anxious, Cid shrugs and tells her she's probably overthinking it. Rose sighs with relief, and as they roll across a stone bridge, Cid looks out the window, glad they've finally arrived. Stepping out onto the right side of the busy street, Cid takes in the grand, historic sights of Lindworm. The town is absolutely packed with lively NPCs, from traveling merchants to chattering townsfolk, while the mouth-watering scent of fresh steak and warm bread wafts from food stalls. Near a beautiful, bubbling fountain, Cid stretches, muttering to Rose about how energetic the place is. Rose beams, suggesting they go sightseeing, but Cid immediately freezes, spotting a souvenir stand. He stares in sheer, unadulterated disbelief at a display of tacky dragon claw keychains holding swords, realizing that even fantasy worlds have the exact same trashy tourist trap merchandise as Japan. Rose, thinking he's just a cute boy, mentions that these keychains are super popular with guys. Cid keeps his mob on, smiling and agreeing they look cool, while picking one up. Rose explains the lore, saying the right hand represents the demon, Diabolos, clutching the sword of the hero Olivier. After a quick mental image of the epic ancient battle where Olivier severed the beast's arm, Rose points to the ruins on the steep mountain where the hand is supposedly sealed. Cid, completely ignoring the lore but loving the edgy aesthetic, immediately decides to buy it. Rose blushes, giggling that it's just a fairy tale anyway. Suddenly, a massive crowd erupts in excitement. Rose gasps, pointing to a promotional banner for a book signing event by the famous author Natsume. She grabs Cid's sleeve and drags him into the massive queue, gushing about how she's a massive fan. Cid digs his heels in, completely refusing to stand in line. Rose, however, goes full fangirl, listing Natsume's masterpieces like Romeo and Juliet, Cinderella, and Little Red Riding Hood. She continues chanting titles like I Am a Cat, Spider-Man, and Spirited Away, which she calls Glopped Away. Cid freezes in absolute horror, sweating profusely as he screams internally about a massive copyright lawsuit. At the front of the line, a hooded author calls for the next person, and Cid genuinely panics, wondering if another reincarnated Earthling is here. But when they reach the table, the author looks up with a bubbly smile, and Cid's existential dread instantly sours into pure irritation when he recognizes his subordinate, Beta. Glaring at her with a deadpan face, he mutters, "The fuck are you doing?" Beta almost chokes on her spit but quickly recovers, giving him a sparkling dramatic smile and beckoning him closer. Cid crosses his arms, repeating his proskening, before asking if her books are at least selling well. Beta demurely replies that she's making bank under her pen name while securing funds and intelligence for Shadow Garden. Cid immediately reels in silent indignation, realizing Beta has been plagiarizing all the bedtime stories he told her when they were kids, and he silently questions if money is all she cares about. Unaware of his mental breakdown, Beta hands him a signed copy, which Cid accepts while internally crying over her greed. Leaning closer, Beta whispers in her best spy movie voice that she was invited as a guest of honor to gather intelligence. Cid, completely checked out, just grunts. Beta adjusts her glasses, whispering that she hid the operation details inside the book, entirely ignoring the nearby waitress who has no idea a high-stakes spy briefing is happening. Realizing Beta is just role-playing a cool secret agent, Cid's anger vanishes, and he happily forgives her for the plagiarism. Meanwhile, Rose clutches her book, completely starry-eyed over Natsume's outstanding creativity. She gushes about how Natsume writes across multiple genres like a genius, while Cid looks on, thinking about how hilariously ironic her praise is. Opening the book, Cid's eyes widen as he sees the pages are covered in strange, swirling, ancient runes. Rose peeks over, shocked that Natsume wrote in runes. Cid nods, but Rose tilts her head, admitting she can't read cursive ancient runes. She asks Cid why Natsume would sign her book like this. Cid proudly raises a finger and declares with absolute conviction, "Hella cool." Rose's jaw drops, and as they walk away, she sweat drops, muttering about how weird boys are. Later, Rose leads Cid to a massive, luxurious hotel suite, explaining that cheap rooms are impossible to find. Cid rubs his neck, acting humble, but Rose tells him there's no need for restraint between them. She says she has to go meet the local higher-ups, as a guest of honor, telling him to relax and order room service. Cid waves goodbye, and the second the door shuts, he faceplants onto the plush mattress, celebrating the joy of leeching off the rich. Meanwhile, night falls over Lindworm, and out on a cobblestone street, a hot-headed girl with long twin tails complains about her grueling 4-day carriage ride. Striking a dramatic pose, she decides to head straight for the hot springs to relieve her fatigue.
The video ends here, but the story isn't over yet. Like the video if you're ready for the next part.
We open our episode in the luxurious, steaming outdoor hot springs of Lindworm, where our favorite Chunibyo protagonist, Cid Kagenou, is having a massive philosophical crisis about personal hygiene. In a dramatic mental cutaway, we see his past life where he stubbornly boycotted baths to save time for grinding his martial arts stats, obviously because playing a mob character requires you not to smell like a dumpster fire. He compromised with hyper-efficient daily showers. We get a classic, overly intense shot of a muscular dude leaning against a white-tiled wall under cold running water, looking absolutely miserable with wet hair because a real gamer has no time for leisurely soaking. The man was literally losing his mind trying to figure out how to parry a nuclear explosion with a basic right punch, hitting a total wall in his training. He clenched his fist so hard his knuckles turned white, genuinely questioning if his physical fist was too weak, if humans were just fundamentally hard-capped by their biology, or if he was simply going off the deep end. But then came his ultimate redemption arc, a soothing dip in a scenic outdoor hot spring. Staring at the majestic sunrise, his mental fog instantly cleared, filling his absolute unit of a body with a surge of raw energy as he struck a confident hands-on-hips pose in the steam. That is when he had his galaxy brain epiphany. If raw muscle can't beat a nuke, he just needed to find actual magic. It helped him reach the final conclusion that only magic could unlock the power required to overpower a nuclear bomb. Back in the present-day Lindworm bath, Cid proudly declares his deep-seated love for hot springs. He proudly claims that they are literally responsible for making him the absolute unit of a man he is today. Naturally, this grand moment is immediately ruined by a deadpan insult from the local toxic tsundere princess Alexia Midgar, who is chilling in the water and complaining that her private bath time is being ruined. She certainly never expected her annoying little pooch to show up and block her view. She sarcastically asks if his wounds have healed up, prompting Cid to flash his default blank NPC stare and play dumb by asking which wound she means. When she aggressively reminds him about the time she accidentally sliced him into pieces, Cid gracefully responds by flipping her the middle finger. After a brief, traumatic flashback of their violent mock battle, Cid casually shrugs off the life-threatening injury while a creepy little one-eyed rock monster watches them from the sidelines. Alexia feigns relief that she didn't become a murderer, prompting Cid to ask if that was her pathetic attempt at an apology. Splashing around, she changes the subject to ask what he is doing in this town. Cid casually admits he was invited by a friend and figured he would spectate the legendary goddess's trial. Seeing his cluelessness, Alexia gives us a handy lore dump about the annual ritual fights where challengers summon ghostly memories of ancient warriors, referencing some vagrant swordsman named Venom, who pulled a top-tier boss fight 10 years ago. Cid thinks fighting ghosts sounds like a neat little minigame, but Alexia quickly shuts down his optimism by explaining that the trial's difficulty scales dynamically with the challenger's own power level. Basically, if no one answers your call, your strength just isn't worth a damn. That is why they call it the goddess's trial to begin with. When Cid asks if she's participating, Alexia explains she's just a VIP guest who is secretly investigating some seriously shady rumors about the local archbishop on behalf of her guild, the Crimson Knights. She whispers that some seriously bad rumors are currently circulating about the local archbishop. Cid acts mildly curious about the details, prompting Alexia to stand up and say she could tell him more if he just joined her Crimson Knights. Cid shuts her down with a swift, "No way in hell." Annoyed, Alexia accuses him of holding back from ogling her stunning body, but Cid deadpans that the sunrise is infinitely more dazzling than her flat self. He warns her that she shouldn't be so fixated on his own legendary Excalibur either. She sneers at his boast, asking who is full of themselves, prompting our main character to hit her with the classic, "Judge not a book by its cover," before abruptly standing up and letting his towel drop. Striking an incredibly dramatic high-tier pose, he begins monologuing about the holy sword leaving its scabbard. He dramatically warns that the unleashed blade shall set out to lands of absolute ruin. With a theatrical flourish of his hand, he flips his towel through the air and proudly struts away completely naked, leaving a profoundly traumatized princess questioning her entire existence in the pool. Meanwhile, deep within the silent, dimly lit cathedral, the plot thickens as the elite elven operative Epsilon finds herself caught in a sudden, quiet vision inside the cathedral. The atmosphere shifts with an eerie hum as a supernatural transition takes place. Her soft footsteps echo through the massive hall as she questions the legendary hero Olivier's truth, staring into a stained glass window where her own reflection briefly morphs into the ancient warrior woman Olivier. Looking down, she discovers the bloody, lifeless corpse of Archbishop Drick pinned to the floor with a sword protruding from his chest. She observes the bloody torso of the fallen official, wondering what secrets he was desperately hiding. She silently asks who could have murdered him, and if he was assassinated by his own faction out of fear that people would look into the rumors. Realizing the dead can't speak, she sighs and heads toward the cathedral's exit, resolving to wait until the gates of the sacramental grounds open tomorrow. Outside in the lively streets, a vibrant festival is underway, and Cid is enjoying the festive atmosphere from a high vantage point. Standing dramatically on the edge of a stone rooftop overlooking the twinkling lights below, he is absolutely loving the dark, edgy shadow protector aesthetic, giggling internally about how cool it is to pretend there's a massive conspiracy going on. Billowing his coat against the night sky, he strikes a dramatic pose and shouts a completely fabricated, edgy line about resisting the chosen path. He sprints across the rooftop paths, but suddenly sensing a presence, he spins around and strikes another magnificent pose while loudly proclaiming more dramatic nonsense. He internally chuckles at his own genius, admitting that he is literally just spouting random, cool-sounding gibberish that fits the nighttime vigilante vibe as he drops down into a dark, narrow alleyway. Suddenly, he hears a panicked gasp. The armed thug with short light hair raises his sword in a defensive stance, demanding to know if Cid saw the whole murder. He immediately panics and assumes our cloaked protagonist is some blood-soaked bandit. Cid, sensing the perfect opportunity to roleplay, drops a line about the night being his domain and dramatically snaps his fingers to initiate a cool execution. Right on cue, a silent, invisible blade of magic slices through the alley, cutting down the threat. As a polished combat boot steps onto the ground, it's Epsilon, her blonde twin tails swaying as she holds her blade with a calm, satisfied smile. She drops to one knee, giving her, Lord, the ultimate respect, and Cid easily plays along, praising her specialized, day-day long-range magic slash. Epsilon practically melts from the compliment, puffed up with pride as she brags about how incredibly hard she's been working to infiltrate the church. Cid mentally notes that while she is a massive tryhard, she is easily the best magic control specialist among his subordinates. Shifting to serious spy mode, Epsilon asks if he received the briefing during their previous signing session, explaining that their main target was assassinated by the church's own executioners. She notes that the armed thug they just took down was also working with them. She requests permission to shift to Plan B, looking up at him with blind, fanatical worship. Cid is internally sweating, completely clueless about any plan but instantly improvises to keep his roleplay streak alive. He nods solemnly, asking if she has the true resolve to make enemies with the entire church, and begins to slowly walk away into the darkness. Epsilon stands tall, passionately declaring that the Shadow Garden has already embraced the infamy of opposing the church. Cid delivers a cold, bone-chilling command for her not to fail him, and Epsilon leaps away into the night, leaving her master alone. The next morning, the grand tiered stone stadium of the Goddess's Trial Arena is absolutely packed with cheering spectators under a clear sky. Up on the central podium, the The bald, incredibly smug, acting Archbishop Nelson stands clutching his holy staff, grandstanding to the audience. Up in the spectator stands, Princess Alexia watches this performance with pure, unadulterated suspicion. She can't shake the feeling that a massive cover-up is unfolding behind the scenes. She knows damn well the Archbishop was brutally murdered last night, and she is highly annoyed that Nelson is actively cock-blocking her official investigation. As the crowd continues to pour into the massive arena, Nelson carries on with his dramatic, hypocritical holy man routine, completely failing to fool the princess who is busy scanning the stage below for clues. Later, during a lavish VIP banquet overlooking the field, Alexia sits stewing in her own frustration. She is convinced a massive cover-up is happening, but her attention is derailed by a far more irritating presence. It's the famous elf novelist Natsume sitting right next to her. Alexia is absolutely fuming over the elven operative displaying her cleavage and sugary, fake socialite behavior. She's disgusted by how obviously Natsume is trying to suck up to people. Sensing the princess's death glare, Beta glances over her glasses with a highly punchable, smug little smirk. Alexia's eye twitches, practically ready to throw hands. Beta turns back with a sweet smile, but her internal monologue is raging. She is furiously jealous that this basic princess got a romantic, bridal carry rescue from Lord Shadow during her kidnapping. She grinds her teeth in jealousy over her attempts to get close to him, fuming over the fact that this cheap woman got herself saved when she was kidnapped. The two sit in a localized storm of pure, murderous pressure, while Beta's imagination runs wild, projecting a romanticized fantasy of herself being swept up in Shadow's heroic arms. Right next to this ticking time bomb of passive-aggressive estrogen, President Rose Midgar is happily sipping her juice through a straw, completely oblivious. From a safe distance, Cid watches them with his signature brain-empty expression, happily concluding that the three girls are becoming the best of friends. Down below, Nelson's booming voice echoes across the stadium as he officially kicks off the main event, gesturing to a massive, glowing magical barrier that seals the arena floor to prevent any outside interference. Down on the dusty arena floor, the first match officially begins as Annerose, a famous warrior from the Land of Swords, steps into the spotlight while the announcer hypes up the crowd. She plants her armored boot with a sharp tap. She comes to a halt in the center, her hand resting upon the hilt of her sword. A massive, shimmering aura of magical pressure erupts around her. The traveler from Begalta is called out, taking a heavy, dust-kicking stride forward. Her cloak billows dramatically as the ancient runes on the floor materialize into a spectral warrior named Bolga, leaving the excited crowd to cheer at her high-level summon. With a sharp clang, Annerose intercepts the Phantom's attack, her battle-hardened eyes reading his stance perfectly. In one fluid, massive swing, she thrusts her blade forward and pierces the spectral knight, causing him to recoil in pain, before he completely dissolves into harmless fairy dust. Having easily secured her flawless victory, she stands proudly as the stadium erupts into wild cheers. Up in the stands, Cid is watching the matches with a completely neutral expression. He rests his chin on his hand with a highly bored look. He quickly realizes that the system automatically scales the summoned warrior's power level to match or exceed the challenger's hidden stats. Watching a weak challenger get absolutely wrecked while waiting for Alpha to make her move, he lets out a massive yawn, fully prepared to take a quick nap, until the announcer suddenly calls out the name of the next participant from Midgar Academy, Cid Kagenou. The crowd politely applauds the local underdog, while Cid begins to shake violently in absolute cold sweat horror, because he never filled out a registration form. A cheerful girl in a beret urges him to get down to the arena, prompting Cid to have a silent, screaming mental breakdown about his peaceful mob identity being completely ruined. Looking over, he spots Rose Midgar watching him with absolute adoration, happily believing that Cid entered the tournament to prove his worth so her royal family would accept their forbidden love. She proudly closes her eyes, incredibly pleased with herself for secretly submitting his application in his stead. Cid, meanwhile, is furiously biting his thumb in a panic. In a split second, his galaxy brain comes up with the ultimate escape plan, a force system override. Suddenly, a massive, violent shockwave of wind blasts through the VIP section, knocking over Beta's drink and shocking the princesses. Nelson spins around in confusion at the sudden atmospheric shift. The girls stand up to shield themselves from the violent gale. An intense close-up captures the sheer confusion of the moment, as Beta and Alexia remain completely frozen at the table. Nelson raises his staff defensively as the wind whips through the arena, prompting Rose to check on Natsume, until Beta points in absolute shock down at the field. Nelson spins in shock, while Rose gasps in disbelief as a heavy, dark-booted step thuds onto the pristine white stone floor below. Standing right in the center of the stadium is a mysterious, cloaked figure, causing the entire crowd to scream in absolute terror. Shadow? From beneath his hood, Cid's eyes glow with intense, edgy focus, surrounded by crackling, dark magical energy as he points his blade at the ground. Raising a gloved hand, he delivers a magnificent, deep monologue about setting the dormant memories of the sacred grounds free. Up in the VIP stands, Alexia and Beta are screaming in absolute confusion, wondering why the hell Shadow is suddenly crashing a public sports event. Nelson clenches his teeth in pure rage at the intrusion and aggressively orders his holy knights to mobilize and capture him. Beta, however, completely misinterprets the situation, assuming her master has discovered some world-ending conspiracy that forced him to change plans. She deduces that something massive must have forced his hand. Beneath his hood, Cid is wearing the biggest, most shit-eating grin of his life, celebrating the absolute genius of using his shadow persona to dodge his homework. But the universe decides to take his bluff seriously, and a massive, blinding pillar of white magical light erupts directly from the arena floor. Beta and Rose look up in absolute awe as Beta whispers that Shadow's ultimate opponent is finally arriving. A colossal, terrifying amount of ancient spectral energy begins to take form. The glowing runes on the floor burn with blinding heat as Beta gasps at the legendary scale of the summon. With a massive explosion that shakes the entire stadium, the light fades to reveal ancient, dark runes that Beta immediately recognizes as belonging to Aurora, the Witch of Ruin. Nelson's jaw literally hits the floor in absolute sweating terror as he realizes Shadow's immense power has summoned her memory. From the fading particles, the legendary Witch of Ruin herself appears, wearing a dark, beautiful smirk. Nelson panics as the light dissipates to reveal her, officially opening the gate of memories to the screaming crowd. Amidst the crumbling ruins of the arena stage, the duel between the legendary witch and the hooded protagonist reached its explosive climax as Cid prepared his final counterattack. With explosive speed, he swung his blade horizontally, unleashing a massive, glowing wave of raw magical energy. He declared with cold confidence that mosquitoes may charge in swarms, but the lion won't fall. The devastating, blinding energy wave erupted across the entire arena stage, carving through Aurora's magical storm and neutralizing her weapons. On the sidelines, Beta, Rose, Alexia, and Nelson watched the massive clash with breathless anticipation. Aurora stood calmly as the dust cleared, observing the aftermath of his incredible counter. The two combatants stood at a distance on the tiled floor, the silence of the arena returning. Aurora smiled faintly with a look of knowing amusement, thoroughly impressed by his combat prowess. Suddenly, Aurora swept her hand forward, launching another massive, sweeping arc of magical energy. Cid planted his feet to intercept the approaching force, bracing his sword. He leaned into the impact, absorbing the heavy, crushing weight of her magical strike as his cape billowed behind him. Aurora rotated her body, unleashing a second, devastating wave of magical pressure. Cid leaned back slightly, narrowing his eyes as he prepared to counter her unrelenting assault. He stood perfectly composed amidst the swirling debris, completely unfazed. Aurora readied a massive, dark scythe as her cloak fluttered in the wind. Beta and Rose watched the display of high-level magic in absolute, silent awe. Frustrated by the delay, Nelson gritted his teeth and angrily yelled, demanding to know what that blasted witch was doing. He frantically demanded she deal with the upstart already as Aurora swung her massive scythe, sending violent shockwaves outward. Aurora executed a high-speed spinning strike with her scythe, surrounded by swirling dark energy. Cid quickly parried the blow, creating a brilliant shower of sparks. His eyes narrowed with total concentration from beneath the brim of his hat. The two engaged in a fierce clash, their weapons grinding against each other in the center of the arena. Aurora swung again, distorting the air with dark shockwaves. Cid deflected the strike with a sharp, high-pitched metallic ring. They exchanged a rapid flurry of blows, their movements appearing as a blur of motion. Cid remained completely serene and detached amidst the chaotic struggle. Cid lunged forward with a precise, powerful thrust as Aurora swung her scythe to parry. Staring into her sorrowful eyes, Cid murmured that he wished he could fight her at her strongest. His strike pierced through her defenses, and Aurora accepted her defeat with a peaceful, resigned expression. Aurora's physical form shattered into countless fragments of brilliant light, dissolving completely into the air. In the stands, Nelson stuttered in absolute shock at her defeat, while Rose looked on in disbelief. Nelson gripped his robes in panic, screaming that it was impossible. Sweat poured down his face as he rages in denial. He threw his head back and bellowed. Down on the arena floor, Cid turned his back and began to walk away with cool indifference. He He maintained a steady, unhurried pace toward the exit, ignoring the commotion. Nelson lunged forward from the stands, desperately yelling for him to stop. He pointed threateningly at the retreating figure, shouting that Shadow wouldn't get away. Suddenly, the massive, engraved stone gates at the end of the arena began to grind open, emitting a blinding burst of white light. A brilliant pillar of light erupted from the opening, forcing the crowd to shield their eyes. Watching from the balcony, Rose gasped in confusion, while Beta pointed and shouted to look. The angelic relief carvings on the stone gate vibrated with flowing magical energy. The heavy doors swung wide open, flooding the arena with blinding light. Nelson sweated in panic, shouting that the sacramental grounds had reacted. Stunned by his reaction, Rose asked what he meant. Nelson grimly explained that this was the only day in the year when its doors may open. He continued, pointing to the gate, noting there were 3 possibilities depending on who tries to open them. He described the legends of the gates of the unwelcome, the summoned, and the accepted, warning there was no way to tell which it was. Looking up at the towering, glowing structure, Rose wondered what lay inside. Nelson replied coldly that investigating that was their job. He turned to the crowd, commanding everyone to leave because the trial couldn't go on. Meanwhile, in another part of the sanctuary's massive hallway, the local edgelord club Shadow Garden is already gathered. Among them, Epsilon is having a low-key fashion crisis, nervously squeezing her tight-fitting bodysuit to ensure her assets haven't deformed, checking her shape and elasticity to confirm everything is perfectly optimized. Alpha, wearing her dark hood, turns her attention and calmly instructs Epsilon to survey the inside of the sanctuary. Epsilon snaps into a crisp military salute, but Alpha pauses with a serious tone before asking the other girls why they snuck behind the door. A long-haired blonde girl holds her hands up defensively, stammering that there's no need for hostility, while Epsilon indignantly argues they didn't even touch anything, as she demands to know what the problem is. Alpha sighs in resignation and takes a step forward, coldly announcing she's uncovered the hidden truth of the cult of Diabolos. She projects a shimmering hologram of an armored elf woman, explaining that the cult's demonic possession isn't about reviving demons. The acting Archbishop Nelson scowls, confused. Alpha points to the glowing projection that looks exactly like her, prompting Nelson to lose his absolute mind, screaming that she should have died from demonic possession. Before he can ruin the monologue, Delta grabs his face and barks at him to shut up. The spectral elf woman hovers in the background as Alpha reveals her identity, the legendary hero Olivier. Nelson breaks free, shouting that it's impossible to awaken that power, and claiming the method has been lost forever. Alpha calmly ignores him, explaining Olivier originally sealed the demon Diabolos in her left arm. In a spectral flashback, we see Olivier's massive image behind Alpha as she details how this sacred ground became a magic-draining graveyard for sacrificed warriors. Alpha demands Olivier reveal her memories, demanding she show the truth, unleashing a magical shockwave that makes Nelson and a nearby researcher grimace in terror. The memory shifts to a massive ancient prison where a blonde woman in a black dress guides Delta and a girl in a black and white formal outfit. The blonde woman gasps in shock while the formal girl looks through the rusted bars. They march past the empty cells as the formal girl trembles, realizing it's a jail. The blonde woman looks incredibly grave as a sharp ringing echoes in the girl's ears. A horrifying memory of starved children begging for food and writhing in absolute agony appears. The twin-tailed girl covers her mouth in tears, finding it incredibly cruel, while a cold, straight-haired girl mutters demonic possession. A pointed-eared girl explains the cult kidnapped orphans for these dark experiments. Alpha narrates over a conceptual test tube of Diabolos' cells, which were implanted into children to give them demon-level stats. We see a young elf girl huddled in despair, alongside other traumatized survivors, as the tube pulses ominously. Most kids rejected the cell and died horribly, foaming at the mouth, but those who adapted were young girls, including Olivier herself. Back in the ruins, the straight-haired blonde girl stammers that heroes and demons are supposed to be just fairy tales. Alpha explains history was altered. Olivier was a girl, not a guy. We see a vision of Olivier in fantasy armor, forced by the cult to fight Diabolos under the guise of doing good. But the cult had other plans, harvesting the giant petrified arm of Diabolos, taking her cells for themselves. The blonde girl stares in disbelief as Alpha notes the arm is still alive. We see a dying blonde man in a hood and a cold cultist standing over him. Alpha explains an elderly researcher used the cells to make a medicine for longevity and strength, producing a drug that grants massive power. In the dusty library, a cat-eared girl gasps that it's the exact same red pill Xenon used. as a vision of a goateed researcher holds a vial. Pointing at Nelson, the cat-eared girl asks if he doesn't look exactly like that researcher, while Nelson scowls haughtily. Alpha notes the medicine's side effects are all too familiar, making the cat-eared girl whisper in horror, while the twin-tailed girl hilariously asks if the side effect is permanent baldness. Nelson gets deeply embarrassed and grumpy as the visual of the red pills fades. Nelson clears his throat, claiming his hair loss is just stress, and proudly reveals the medicine is called Tears of Diabolos. When the twin-tailed girl apologizes, Nelson explains the effects wear off unless taken yearly, and only 12 doses are made, a limited supply for the elite. The girl realizes the Knights of the Round consists of 12 members. Nelson smirks, suddenly teleporting in a flash of light as a dark shadow, introducing himself as Nelson, the Avaricious, the 11th seat, telling them this is his domain. He swings his staff to attack, but Delta instantly blitzes him, throwing a devastating punch directly into his face. Nelson goes flying, coughing up blood, leaving the other girls bewildered, which makes Alpha sigh and scold Delta for not staying on command. Delta panics and apologizes, trying to defend herself by wildly pointing her fingers, though Alpha notes she's just wagging her tail in excitement. As her tail blurs behind her, Delta giggles, babbling about a poisonous snake she smooshed earlier. Suddenly, the library floor explodes. Nelson emerges near the core, explaining the magic draining zone is his advantage, revealing his drawn sword, before spawning a dozen bald illusion clones of himself. Standing on the far side, he watches Delta, who is completely confused by the multiplying Baldy. Nelson sneers that he has the advantage, lunging forward to slice her up. As she parries his blade, suddenly, Alpha snaps one of the clones' necks, realizing they are physical solid copies, and wondering if it's the Sanctuary's defense system. Alpha demands to know if Diabolos' drops are perfected, if hero descendants are the key, and if Olivier's blood is needed. Nelson smugly yells it's too late, creating a blinding flash of light. Delta leaps into the air with a feral scream as she flies forward with clawing speed and completely obliterates Nelson's sword with a single shattering strike. Nelson stands sweating and clutching his broken hilt. Alpha smiles, telling Delta to please use moderation, but Delta just growls, completely locked in beast mode, because Delta doesn't know the meaning of holding back.
Out on the blood-soaked Sanctuary battlefield, Delta goes full feral beast mode, with her wolf ears perked and sharp fangs bared in a wild, predatory grin. Swinging her blade in a ferocious downward arc, she slices straight through the white-whitiformed trash mobs in a wet shower of crimson blood. Alpha watches the sheer carnage unfold, acknowledging that Delta's unhinged build relies on zero technique or magic, just raw, formless physical DPS violence, while a blonde NPC bystander freezes in utter horror. Delta brutally chops down another fodder soldier with a bloodthirsty grin. Even Alpha breaks into a sweat watching Delta's terrifying, unoptimized stat check. Standing high atop a towering mountain of corpses while flexing a severed head, Delta looks like an unhinged final boss, prompting Alpha to softly murmur, "Pity for the Archbishop." The wild wolf girl immediately leaps into the surviving garrison, scaring the absolute daylight out of the cowering squad. Soaring through the air, Delta forces Baldy Nelson to shrink back on the dirt, screaming, "Stay away!" Laughing like a total psychopath, Delta turns her blood-splattered face toward the last remaining foes. She casually licks the wet blood off her index finger with a sadistic smile, giggling cheerfully. Just one left. Before she can steal the kill, Alpha steps up from behind, pressing cold steel against Archbishop Nelson's throat and roasting his weak minion spam. Looks like you can't create replicas forever. Humans just aren't skilled enough to control multiple bodies with one brain. You might as well summon an army of scarecrows. The panicked bishop contorts his face in desperation, screaming, "Stay away!" before thrusting his staff skyward and yelling into the wind, "The Sanctuary's powers are far greater. Come to me, Olivier!" Right on cue, the legendary elf warrior Olivier swoops down with a massive, ornate sword and lands like a stiff, programmed robot. Alpha eyes her analytically, muttering, "Olivier. Just as I thought. You're moving further into the sanctuary grounds. Delta crouches like an overeager puppy before her superior, asking, "Are you going to play with me next?" Alpha stays composed as Epsilon approaches formally, stating, "Reporting." Maintaining her professional demeanor, Epsilon delivers her update. "I've finished scouting the sanctuary. I have gathered all the information that we need from this floor." Alpha gives her a nod of quiet satisfaction, replying, "I see. Well done." Deciding they've cleared the room's main objectives, Alpha leads the group away, saying, "That's enough wasting time then. Let's go." Nelson throws a salty temper tantrum, yelling after them, "Are you running away? Huh, you're just cowards who stand no chance against Olivier." Alpha pauses to hit him with cold authority. "Don't get the wrong idea. Our goal is to quell the source that gives this sanctuary its powers." As Delta growls aggressively at Nelson, Alpha adds, "We never had business with you. We're going, Delta." Before hitting her wild subordinate with an intimidating half-closed glare, think twice about whom you're baring your fangs against. Delta's murderous aura instantly evaporates into pure terror as she whimpers distressfully. "I'm sorry. I apologized. So please don't take my snacks away." Watching this absurd exchange, Sly Snake Doem scowls in frustration, while Delta begs for her snacks in the background, grumbling inwardly that setting a trap to get Alpha's blood will be a massive achievement. Narrowing his eyes with a sinister look, Doem turns away, thinking, "For now, I should take care of the other rat that has found its way in." Meanwhile, deep inside the sanctuary's inner chambers, Cid is rattling a heavy metal door handle like a stuck player, complaining, "No good. It won't budge. I'm afraid I can't cut these chains either." Standing beside him at the massive arched portal, Goth Mommy Aurora points out the generic puzzle mechanic. There should be a key of sorts around. I think finding that will allow us to advance, making Cid nod like he's solving a high-brained puzzle. "I see. So we must find an item that can cut the chains." They wander into the sword room, where a glowing ceremonial blade rests in a stone pedestal. And Cid goes, "I mean, that's gotta be it, right?" To which Aurora agrees, "Yes, no matter how you look at it." Reading the runic inscription, Cid notes the painfully generic quest design. It says, "Cut the chains with the sword" here. Just like I thought. Quite the simple setup. Though Aurora warns, "No, hold on. It might not be so simple." Completely ignoring her warning, Cid yoinks the sword straight out of the pedestal like basic floor loot, stating casually, "Yep, thought so." He instantly triggers his dramatic inner monologue, gasping, "This is a sword that only the Chosen One can pull out." Aurora's mind is blown as she shouts, "What?" It's a common pattern. All templates like this are ingrained in my brain at this point, while Aurora whispers in awe, "You've memorized all possible patterns of magic rune encryption? Is that what you mean?" Even though Cid is just abusing standard trope patterns, Archbishop Nelson interrupts their puzzle speedrun from the vault exit, snickering, "Too bad for you." Moving into the chain door corridor, the arrogant bishop boasts, "That door won't open for the likes of you." Cid turns to face him alongside Aurora, noting calmly, "Oh, if it isn't the big guy who summoned Aurora." Nelson looks down at them mockingly, saying, "I don't know what kind of stray you are," before adding, "But now that you're here, your life must end, kid." Nelson commands his combat puppet, shouting, "You shall die after being led astray by that witch, cut to pieces by Olivier." While Cid analyzes the elven warrior, thinking, "Olivier? She looks like Alpha? No, that can't be her. The way she walks and moves is completely different." Aurora frantically warns, "You can't fight her. She's..." Wait, but Cid glares at Olivier, replying sternly, "I know," as he mentally assesses her stats. She's strong. Suddenly, Olivier stands still before bursting forward in a blur, launching a diagonal energy slash that grazes Cid's neck. Cid instantly retaliates with a swing so absurdly powerful that the stone wall behind him shatters into airborne fragments. Dropping low into a crouch, Cid calculates his handicap situation. That was close. I almost had my head cut off. Since I can't use magic, I need to be a bit careful. Olivia stares back with robotic precision before triggering a violent explosion of energy and firing a massive beam of white light that launches Cid backward. Pain flashes in Cid's eyes as the energy connects, sending him crashing heavily onto the stone floor. Olivier closes the gap and pierces his chest with concentrated light, scattering blood across the corridor as Cid lets out an agonizing scream while Gamma gasps in complete horror. Nelson laughs mockingly, as if a mere kid could lift a finger against the hero. Looking down at Cid, lying flat in a growing pool of blood, Nelson notes, looks like he's still breathing, albeit barely. Standing tall, Nelson commands, "Do it, Olivier. Put him out of his misery." Aurora rushes forward, screaming, "Wait!" as she desperately shields Cid. "Please, stop. He got in here by accident. That's no reason to kill him." Nelson sneers at the classic heroic trope, yelling, "Now that's a story for the ages. A witch protecting someone? The Witch of Calamity, Aurora." Doem steps up to exploit her, saying, "But this could work in our favor. If you agree to lend your powers to our cause, I might spare his life." Aurora asks, "Your cause?" But Doem dismisses her incomplete memories, threatening, "Oh, right, your memories are incomplete. But don't concern yourself with that. Just agree to my terms. If you take too long, you will die, you know." Kneeling close to Cid, Aurora gives up with somber resignation, saying quietly, "All right, before surrendering, I'll do whatever you want me to." But Cid ruins her dramatic sacrifice scene by coughing from the floor. "It'd be nice if you didn't leave me out," and growling. "Or if you could stop talking like I've lost. It kind of pisses me off." Aurora gasps in utter shock. You can still stand up?" Nelson scoffs, mocking. He's lucky, if nothing else. "Do you still intend on fighting with that broken sword?" while staring at the shattered hilt, snickering. "Interesting." Nelson orders the execute command, shouting, "It's time to finish him off!" Olivier charges as Aurora screams, "No!" and lunges with her blade, while Aurora shrieks, "Don't!" But instead of dodging, Cid intentionally tanks the hit through his chest to close the distance, wrapping his arms around Olivier with a blood-splattered, terrifying grin. "Gotcha." Seizing Olivier firmly by the throat, Cid slams her body into the stone floor with bone-crunching force, leaving Aurora and Nelson completely stunned as Olivier's eyes dilate, with blood dripping from her lips. Cid stands up, looming over his defeated foe, while Nelson recoils in terror, screaming, "How? What on earth are you? How can you still stand after taking those injuries?" Cid grins maniacally, prompting Nelson to yell, "Amidst all this, how can you still laugh?" Partially covering his bloody face, Cid chuckles softly. "Laugh? Oh, guess I am. I wonder why." Cid then lays out his insane barbarian health bar philosophy. "I can tell you one thing, though. I didn't collapse because this is a dull battle with no conversation." And adds, "Olivier has no soul. She didn't answer any of my questions." Taking a heavy step forward, Cid breaks down human health mechanics. "You know the funny thing about humans is that they're surprisingly tough, as long as you keep the vital organs safe. You won't die easily unless you take a really bad hit." He takes another deliberate step, continuing, "That's just amazing, don't you think? You won't die as long as it's an okay hit. If it doesn't kill you, you don't have to bother dodging. Standing near Doem, Cid lays out the ultimate hardcore strat. Or you can rip out their neck with your teeth while your stomach's been pierced, and concludes, you can keep hitting your enemy while they're smashing you up. Doem backs away in pure horror, screaming, have you gone completely mad? Panicking, Nelson summons a massive clone army of elven warriors that surround Cid, yelling, don't get cocky just because you defeated one inferior copy. Behold what is possible within the sanctuary. Standing unmoving amidst the converging swords, Cid lowers his head with a cold look as complete darkness swallows the corridor, delivering his epic pre-kill line. Sorry to say, but time's up. Back in the main corridor, a high-pitched ringing freezes Olivier in place, right before a massive shockwave of white energy detonates, hurling her backward through shattering masonry. Standing in the debris with blood on his cheek and an unhinged grin, Cid explains his magical mana bypass strategy to the terrified villains. If your mana is being sucked away, temper it until it's too tough to be drained. It took a while, but here we are. Gripping his sword hilt, Cid discards all dungeon puzzle logic, declaring loudly, now we can skip all the bullshit. Pull the sword out, cut the chains, open the door, destroy the core. There's no need for all that, while dark energy swirls around him like an unhinged boss aura. If you can just blow everything away. Problem solved. Nelson screams hysterically. You're kidding. Are you? No way. Don't fuck with me, you stupid kid. While Doem roars in desperation. I won't let you. Both villains frantically order their minion. Olivier, you must stop that monster. And stop him, whatever it takes, as the elven warrior leaps through the air and slashes across Cid's chest in a spray of blood. Aurora gasps in terror, and Nelson cheers prematurely. Yes, kill him! Kill him! Totally ignoring his open wound, Cid drops into his ultimate cast stance, whispering softly, I am, and swings his blade down to release his iconic game-breaking finisher. Atomic! The colossal atomic blast engulfs the entire chamber in blinding light, instantly pulverizing the heavy chain door and breaking the iron bindings. Fragments of shattered masonry float in midair amidst irradiated dust, while the ornamental sword sits plunged deep into the cracked stone floor. Far beyond reality, in a dark void, the colossal clawed hand of Diabolos shatters into glowing light fragments as its cosmic chains snap into dust. When the smoke clears, the scenery shifts into a peaceful, sun-drenched flower meadow where Cid wakes up flat on his back, looking up as Aurora smiles gently down at him. Thank goodness, you've come too. Sitting up among the blossoms, Cid listens as Aurora marvels. You're full of surprises, like surviving even after having your heart pierced. To which Cid casually explains his hitbox shifting trick. Oh yeah, like I said, you just gotta protect the vitals. And adds, it just took a fraction of a second to adjust where she stabbed me. I could have stopped my heart to pretend I was dead too. Earning a playful reply. What a handy heart you have. Looking out over the rolling green hills, Aurora notes, either way, thanks to you, the sanctuary disappeared without a trace. Seeing her silhouette glowing with ethereal light, Cid asks, will you disappear too? To which Aurora softly answers, yes, I suppose. Turning to him, she confesses her final secrets. Truth is, I told you 2 lies. I said that you wandered in there on your own, even though I was the one that called you there, and reveals the other lie was that I wanted to disappear. Reaching down, Aurora gently lifts Cid's chin, forcing him to look into her violet eyes. But now, I have a memory that I don't want to lose. Thank you for this precious memory. she leaves him with one melancholic request. If, after I disappear, you manage to find the real me before her form dissolves into golden light particles floating into the sun.
Cid sits alone in the quiet meadow, stunned in silent sorrow. Later, standing on a windy hillside under the vast open sky, Cid silently reflects on her true, lingering plea. Kill me. While high on the edge of a cliff overlooking a massive crater where the fortress used to be, Epsilon delivers her report to Alpha. So, Lady Alpha, the sanctuary disappeared. Alpha gazes across the ruined landscape, replying quietly, "Yes, I can see that." Epsilon asks, "What about the holy sword?" And Alpha confirms, "Gone, along with the sanctuary." Epsilon asks, "The sample from the core?" To which Alpha answers, "The core also disappeared." Placing a hand over her mouth, Alpha admires her boss's master plan, saying, "Such a simple yet thorough plan, truly as befitting of him." While Epsilon boasts happily, "Lord Shadow is the only one who can pull this off so easily," as Delta rests lazily nearby. Alpha's eyes narrow analytically. "We've also taken a huge step forward since we've managed to confirm our theory," making Epsilon realize. "So the reason Lord Shadow changed the plan back there?" Alpha stares off into the distance, lost in thought. Yes, he must have been aware for a long time about the Witch of Calamity, Aurora. A heavy silence settles over the desolate earth as Shadow Garden officially steps one step closer to unearthing the buried history of the demon Diabolos. Right after Cid nuked the sanctuary out of pure frustration, a subtle shift rippled through the dynamic between Shadow Garden and the local royal princess. In a small clearing within the vast forest nearby, Princess Alexia sat by a crackling campfire, holding a skewer of grilled meat, thoughtfully reflecting that the whole ordeal felt like a strange dream. Rose Oriana sat across from her, contemplating their bizarre survival after almost becoming bear snacks, while Beta casually chewed her meat and noted that their bodyguard took care of the threat, even if bear meat is hard to chew, prompting Alexia to address them and ask if they were angry. Beta paused to ask what there was to be mad about, only for Alexia to point out that they could only watch helplessly as events unfolded in the sanctuary. Alexia's brows furrowed as she vented about lacking power, knowledge, and info, warning that if they stayed so ignorant, someone or something important would eventually be stolen from them. Resting her chin on her hand, Rose agreed, pointing out that ever since the Academy terrorist attack, secret organizations have been pulling strings behind the scenes, while both Shadow Garden and their enemy faction remain shrouded in mystery. Beta adjusted her glasses with top-tier fake innocence, gazing into the trees with a dreamy look, while wondering aloud who that super handsome or totally suspicious shadow guy could be. Sitting in the center of the clearing, Alexia gestured as an idea struck her for the three of them to join hands. Pointing her index finger emphatically, she pitched combining her royal authority with Rose's idle popularity to gather and share top-secret intel among themselves. Alexia then glanced at Beta with a confused sweat drop, admitting she still didn't get Beta's deal, though Beta just chuckled behind her hand and called Alexia quite a character herself. Rose instantly embraced the power of friendship trope, smiling brightly and nodding in enthusiastic agreement that fate brought them together for a reason. Reaching into the center of their gathering, the three women clasped hands firmly to seal the alliance, vowing to work together and protect those dear to them. Alexia looked off to the side with a soft expression, picturing a crude sketch of her favorite human dog toy, Cid, in her mind. Rose gazed upward with intense adoration, while stylized sparkles while picturing Cid, while Beta stood completely mesmerized,
drooling with a flushed face as she envisioned Lord Shadow framed by lush white roses. As all three wondered in unison what he was doing at that very moment, Cid was casually strolling through the woods, while a massive bear flew through the air behind him, blasted into orbit by his serious dash, as he obliviously wondered if he had run something over. Meanwhile, at the Shadow Garden base, a massive flex of a western estate backed by towering mountains, Gamma was presenting a progress report, confidently explaining that Mitsugoshi's new stores and urban development in the Bogarta Empire were printing money. Alpha listened intently with crossed arms, praising Gamma's elite business stats and asking about expected returns. But just as Gamma started explaining their new oil field discoveries, Delta burst onto the scene like an unhinged apex predator in front of a giant dark boar beast. Hopping up and down, the best girl wolfkin flexed her massive kill and asked if she did good, prompting Alpha to give her a gentle smile and praise her. But when Alpha tried to pivot back to high-level real estate strategy, Delta cut her off, beaming about gifting the giant boar to the boss so he'd give her epic head pats. Alpha's eyes immediately narrowed into an icy, authoritative glare. Delta completely froze with a blank stare as Alpha hit her with the ultimate reprimand for interrupting important business over a carcass the boss couldn't even use. Thoroughly demoralized, Delta forcefully slammed the massive beast into the dirt, leaving the poor monster whimpering pathetically on the grass. Leaning her chin on the creature's pelt, Delta hopefully asked if they could eat it together. But Alpha sighed calmly and told her to keep the loot for herself. Delta cheered joyfully, while Gamma watched from a distance and smiled, noting Delta only listens to Alpha while she still gets bitten. Alpha thoughtfully explained that Delta's pack instincts keep her from defying her peers, admitting Delta wasn't obedient with her at first either. Gamma tilted her head curiously, asking how Delta even joined Shadow Garden in the first place. That sparked a flashback to a wild wolf beastkin who was once an unmatched hunter before being cast out due to the possession curse. Standing unsteadily in a snowy wilderness, drained of strength, the girl collapsed backward into the deep snow, muttering that she could still hunt. Footsteps crunched in the snow as Alpha approached, noting her illness was at an advanced stage. Alpha tried to calm the growling wolf girl, reassuring her that she came to help, but when Delta lunged aggressively, Alpha swiftly grabbed her collar and pinned her into the snow. Looking down at the struggling girl with a detached gaze, Alpha realized Delta wouldn't listen to reason and that she might end up injuring her. Alpha turned toward the dark figure behind her, asking him to handle the situation. Delta immediately twitched and shivered in sudden, violent terror from his overwhelming aura. Shadow stepped forward into the snowy clearing, his dark cloak billowing heavily in the cold winter wind. Extending a gloved hand, Shadow offered his cheat code salvation, inviting her to seek power with him. Looking upon the fragile girl, Shadow bestowed her new title as Delta. Overwhelmed by his magnificent presence, Delta wept and shivered in submission on the frozen ground. Cid later misread this whole interaction in his own mind, wondering if her helpless pose was just a weird pose of submission that went totally differently from his interaction with Alpha. Returning to the present, Alpha concluded her story, and Gamma warmly agreed that no player can hold a candle to Lord Shadow, which caused Delta to spin around in a frenzy, splattering dark slime across her face as she shouted that their boss could conquer the world. Alpha sighed calmly at the chaos, while Gamma scolded the wolfkin to eat her giant boar with more decorum. Inside Epsilon's private quarters at the base, morning light illuminated her lavish setup, featuring a grand canopy bed. Sitting up on her mattress, Epsilon stretched and yawned softly, noting that everyone was up early for the daily grind. Stepping over to her ornate full-length mirror, she prepared to kick off her daily micromanagement routine. Slime body makeup, she smirked with narrowed eyes at her reflection, knowing that maintaining her fake physique took serious time, and that one physics error would reveal her body lift. Floating dark fluid slime in midair, she molded it around her upper torso, checking if the shape was full and beautiful. Examining her slender waist, she pondered if it was firm yet soft to the touch, and natural enough to pass as a perfect hourglass. She carefully inspected the outer flare of her hips to make sure the volume was just right. Checking her leg length and the sharp points of her high heels, she balanced her posture, treating her stat padding as an art unto itself. Standing in her formal dress, she applied lipstick in front of the mirror, taking pride in the fact that no one knew her secret enhancement. Squeezing the lipstick tube gently, she resolved inwardly that she would go to any lengths to defend her secret. Smoothing her fingers through her blonde hair, she adjusted her black twin-tail ribbons, completing the thought that all of this effort was for his sake. Suddenly, she struck a dynamic one-legged pose surrounded by sparkles, shouting her signature Epsilon finisher move before dropping into a bewitching pose and winking playfully to announce her Lord Shadow instant bewitching pose. She stood sideways to assess the curves of her silhouette, beaming into her reflection with a smug grin as she declared that today was another win for a beautiful her. Her mind drifted back to a grandiose fantasy of shouting, "Victory is mine!" and claiming she wouldn't lose to natural curves in front of a bewildered alpha on a cobblestone street. In this romanticized memory, she walked proudly beside a tall, hooded figure, convincing herself that their reunion granted absolute confirmation of her charms. Framing Lord Shadow with imaginary roses, she convinced herself that his intense glare was actually a passionate gaze locked squarely onto her chest. She recalled striding away with a satisfied grin after pretending not to notice his captivated eyes, cooping her glowing cheeks in pure bliss as she reeled in the belief that her master had succumbed to her charms. Returning to reality in the bright hallway of the base, Epsilon spotted Beta walking nearby and immediately moved to assert dominance over her natural rival. Marching forward with a smug stride, Epsilon deliberately collided chest first into Beta with a sharp bump. When Beta stumbled back in confusion and asked to be let through, Epsilon pompously gestured to her chest and loudly excused herself because her gigantic breasts got in the way. Leaning in close, Epsilon flexed how tough life is with huge breasts, teasingly asking if Beta knew what kind of incident they caused recently. Posing dreamily with imaginary stars floating around her, Epsilon pointed to her bosom and swooned that Master was staring passionately right here. Beta's eyes widened in utter disbelief as she screamed that it couldn't be and protested that it was just Epsilon's imagination. Epsilon stroked her chin thoughtfully, countering that it was true and that she was surprised herself, while Beta fruitlessly tried to argue back. Pointing a mock modest finger, Epsilon purred that between the two of them, Beta was so much cuter and boostier, leaving her rival thoroughly rattled. Raising her arms in a triumphant pose, Epsilon taunted Beta by asking if she had experienced that passionate gaze lots of times, leaning in with a sly, "Right?" Beta ground her teeth and squinted in sheer embarrassment, barely managing to stammer as her defense crumbled. Pressing her advantage, Epsilon put on a look of dramatic surprise and asked if it had never happened before, bombarding her with fake sympathy about her sizable bosom and hourglass figure. Epsilon finished her psychological assault by mentioning Beta's long, pretty legs, leaving Beta completely shattered. Unable to take another second of teasing, Beta broke down in panicked tears and dashed frantically down the hallway screaming, while Epsilon watched her flee with a satisfied smile. Standing alone as her twin tails fluttered, Epsilon coldly murmured that naturals are weeds to be culled, her gaze darkening with possessive resolve, as she secretly vowed that her master's affections belonged to her alone. Meanwhile, high atop a soaring rooftop in Midgard, Cid sat dangling his legs over the city expanse while sipping wine, pondering his meeting in Lindworm. He realized he had indeed stared at Epsilon's chest area, though only because he couldn't help noticing the incredible amount of extra slime body lifting control she had been exerting. Picturing Epsilon strutting proudly in her formal dress, Cid concluded that despite her towering pride, she was ultimately a kind-hearted girl who looked out for others, her pride made endearingly obvious by the sheer volume of slime she meticulously layered onto herself.
Kicking things off high atop an impossibly tall rooftop in the kingdom of Midgar, our boy Cid is chilling, but his mind is totally back in his past life, sweating over failed gaming speedruns because he didn't optimize his character's hitbox detection.
That frustrating mistake makes him hyper-focused on raw physical data now. So when he sips his wine and thinks about Epsilon, he reveals he only glanced at her chest because his veteran eyes detected her absolute pixel-perfect god-tier slime manipulation control patting her out. Picturing the elf strutting proudly, Cid concludes her endearing slime layering is just her way of looking out for others, completely missing her possessive naturals or weeds villain monologue down below. Wait, no. He just pictures her strutting and concludes she's a hard worker whose obvious padding is totally wholesome.
Cut to the spacious training hall of the Spellsword Academy, where the student president Rose is sweating through a wooden sword drill, reflecting on how she was born a princess in the country of arts.
She admits that members of the royal family are expected to become masters of an art form, whether it's painting or playing an instrument, and you're expected to choose a discipline and devote your life to it. Narrowing her eyes, she remembers that from a young age, she had a taste for different kinds of art, and whatever she tried her hands at, she received high praise. However, in the end, she chose the way of the sword, even though in Oriana, fencing is looked down upon as barbaric. But she managed to shake off her inhibitions and get accepted as a transfer student at the Spellsword Academy. Her mind drifts back to a childhood memory of a sharp sword tip pointed toward her, and she says she hasn't regretted it for a moment because the beautiful swordsmanship she saw that day will be forever engraved in her heart. Sitting in the memory, young Rose pensively notes this precious memory is something she hasn't shared with anyone before, vowing that one day she will also wield her sword with such grace. Returning to the present, she assumes a disciplined stance, declaring she needs to focus because her father will be coming to this year's God of War festival. Looking straight ahead with dread, she notes that if her fencing skills can't earn his approval, he will no doubt order her to return home. Softening her gaze, she admits she can't leave while her heart belongs to another. As the rain clears outside, she makes her resolve clear, whispering that she has no need for a fiancé, totally subverting the generic arranged marriage anime trope. Meanwhile, Cid is blending into the festival crowd, smirking that the time is at hand. Perched on a rooftop, he declares he's been awaiting this fated day, and it's finally time to do the thing from the top of his to-do list. He envisions his ideal entrance, where a mysterious young man enters the arena, and the crowd goes from, that guy's dead meat, to, hold on, he's kind of strong, and finally, just who on earth is this guy? Determined to make it reality, he notes he needs to hide his identity and enlists some help to prepare the stage. Shortly after, he arrives at the opulent Shadow Garden headquarters, where Gamma and a line of maids bow deeply, welcoming him and eagerly awaiting his orders. Lounging on a lavish throne, Cid simply states he needs them to do him a favor. Gamma politely asks why there's a need to hide his identity, and Cid replies he wants to participate in the festival while hidden. Turning his head to offer a mysterious profile, he dismisses further inquiry, saying sorry, but he'd rather keep the reason to himself. Standing before him, Gamma bows in submission, realizing she can't reveal his secrets to anyone. Suddenly, she covers her mouth, cheeks flushing red in sheer self-reproach, crying out about how she could act like this in front of their lord. Addressing the others, she rationalizes his foresight, noting she heard what happened in Lindworm, where no one saw through his actions and they just forced him to get involved. Her eyes widen with admiration
as she declares adapting to the situation was the most supreme choice, and they should have known. As Cid keeps his eyes closed in detachment, she adds it will be a long time before they can think as he does, and showing even an ounce of doubt is outrageous. Kneeling low, Gamma begs for forgiveness and says it shall be as he wishes. Standing up, she immediately orders Nu that this calls for her skills, and Nu readily agrees. Nu steps forward with makeup brushes, explaining she can use special slime makeup to shape his face and skin texture, asking what appearance to sculpt. Looking at her with utter seriousness, Cid demands she make him look as weak as possible, like someone who might trip over their own feet. Moving the camera down to the registration hall outside the grand classical stone arena, Cid takes in the majestic sight and resolves it's time to register himself. Stepping inside the sprawling room surrounded by high masonry walls, he navigates a massive queue of combatants waiting while armored guards stand watch. Observing the packed room, Cid intentionally slumps his shoulders into an unassuming posture, blending in alongside giant sword wielders and elven warriors. He eyes a portly adventurer with an eye patch, evaluating the rough-faced drunk, and noting approvingly that he still manages to look far weaker in comparison. Next, his gaze drifts to a muscular man in glasses flexing his huge biceps, and despite thinking the guy looks like he might fall over from a gust of wind, Cid is satisfied the man's build guarantees he appears even weaker. A secret, arrogant smirk breaks across Cid's face as he congratulates himself on looking like the absolute weakest person in the entire room, relishing how perfectly his protagonist in disguise stealth build is coming together. Suddenly, an outstretched arm cuts through his line of sight, blocking his path as a generic quest giver NPC named Annerose calls out that she doesn't think he should be here.
Clad in combat armor, she grips his shoulder firmly, sternly warning that he's just asking to get himself killed. Narrowing her eyes, she introduces herself as Annerose and lectures that he's clearly a rookie who'll be in a world of hurt if he enters on a whim. Maintaining a vacant face, Cid's mind races as he recognizes a perfect opportunity to lay the groundwork for his persona, realizing that acting timid now would ruin everything, and he needs to play the cheeky weakling, turning a cold, sideways glare toward her. He responds that he doesn't need her concern. He adds indifferently that she might want to stop judging people based on appearance. Brushing past her, he leaves Annerose, calling after him in irritation, shouting that he's full of attitude, and she was just trying to look out for him. Before he gets far, a sudden physical impact jolts him forward as a scarred meat shield named Quentin rumbles that he sees the kid is full of spunk. Quentin aggressively drapes his heavy arm over Cid's shoulder, sneering that he should take the warning to heart because this isn't the place for a rookie. Flaunting his presence, the brute boasts that he's a regular at these festivals and always sees small-timers like him who are better off running home to suck on mommy's tits. Calmly facing the thug, Cid offers a blunt retort, stating that he's stronger than him, at least. The surrounding crowd erupts into surprised chatter, with Quentin's companions shouting in disbelief that a small fry is dissing him. Furious, Quentin violently grabs Cid by the collar, lifting him slightly and growling for him to watch his mouth and ask who's stronger. Looking up without fear, Cid maintains a subtle smirk and doubles down, saying he meant that Quentin is chicken shit. Roaring that someone needs to be taught a lesson, the brute swings a wild, heavy punch that cuts through the air with a loud whoosh. The massive fist whistles empty air inches from his face as Cid smoothly leans his upper body back to dodge the strike. In a tight close-up of Cid's unwavering eye, his mind remains perfectly composed as he notes how hilariously slow the strike is. Observing Quentin's wide, clumsy stance, Cid recognizes that while sword fighting is advanced here, people fight barehanded like complete amateurs. So he decides not to counterattack and deliberately locks his posture back into a pathetic 45-degree hunch. Smack!
Quentin's fist strikes Cid directly across the cheek, violently snapping his head sideways. Wham! The sheer force of the blow throws Cid backward through the air to solidify his weak facade. Quentin stands over him on the stone floor, striking him repeatedly, while the surrounding collective of onlookers laughs and mocks what a weakling he is. Gloating over his victory, Quentin jeers that the greenhorn can't even lift his arms, while Cid stays hunched on the ground, clutching his chest, flawlessly acting out total defeat. "Enough," shouts a sharp, commanding voice as Annerose steps firmly between them. Standing tall over the scowling brute, she challenges that if he wants to continue, she'll be his opponent, or they could call the authorities to disqualify him. Outmaneuvered, Quentin scowls and backs off, grumbling that whatever, he'll have it his way. Watching him retreat, Annerose scoffs dismissively, asking if that was all, while nearby spectators sneer that it's a joke. Kneeling down towards Cid, she extends an apologetic hand, asking if he's okay, and apologizing for not stepping in right away. Looking at him with deep concern, she advises that if he goes out there to fight, it'll be even worse, so he should reconsider participating for his own sake. To her utter surprise, Cid pushes himself up on his own without taking her hand, responding flatly that it's not an issue. Tilting his head away into a shadowy, brooding profile, he lowers his gaze and turns to walk away. Annerose stares after him in sheer shock, sweating as she realizes in disbelief that despite taking all those heavy punches, he didn't have a single bruise on his face. Cutting to the bustling city thoroughfare as Cid strides away, Annerose reaches out her hand desperately, shouting across the stone room to ask for his name. Continuing forward without slowing his pace, Cid offers a quiet, mystery-laden reply over his shoulder, simply calling himself Jimina. Annerose remains frozen in place, whispering the name under her breath in sheer disbelief. Meanwhile, sitting relaxed on a public wooden bench, Cid happily munches on a snack from a paper bag, savoring the moment and celebrating how brilliantly he executed his mysterious outsider roleplay. The paper bag, with its printed logo, rests quietly on the bench beside him as he takes another satisfying bite, muttering, "Hell yeah, nailed it," because he already made great strides. In his mind's eye, he envisions a dramatic fantasy scene where an imposing warrior sneers down at a scorned weakling while onlookers bow. Back in reality, Cid smirks with narrow, deeply satisfied eyes, reasoning triumphantly that during the competitions, he will reveal his true power at the climax to influence the expectations of the audience. He even imagines sharp observers, like the student president, gasping in shock as they notice something strangely enigmatic about his weak persona. Resting peacefully, he smiles happily, noting that he registered without any issues and can't wait for the first heat next week. A single leaf flutters past as Rose Oriana, clad in her Spellsword Academy uniform, stands nearby and leans forward to note his carefree look, warning he should be vigilant at all times. Greeting him, she asks if he was practicing, and Cid casually replies yes, while asking if she's been to McTunnels. Rose smiles brightly, touching her chin as she shares that their food is delicious and she went there with Miss Natsume and Alexia. When Cid asks if they're friends, she replies enthusiastically that she's been especially hitting it off with Natsume, adding that Alexia is a very kind girl, so it's easy to get along with her. Cid internally scoffs, thinking if that psycho looks kind to her, she's got another thing coming. Just as Rose's warm smile suddenly fades into a solemn, sorrowful expression. Standing straight before him, her tone turns dead serious as she confesses that she's going to meet her fiancé after this. Taken aback, Cid utters an "eh?" and Rose turns her head away, misconstruing his look and asking him not to make a sad face because she's already betrayed many people's expectations. Placing her right hand over her heart, she admits she might end up causing disappointment again, but stresses that this time she's not doing it for herself. She closes her eyes, bowing her head slightly
as she whispers that whatever happens to her, she hopes he'll believe in her. Facing Cid one last time, she offers a wistful farewell, declaring that's all she wishes for, and hoping they can meet like this again. Turning on her heel, she prepares to take her leave, but Cid suddenly speaks up to catch her attention.
Rose turns back with a surprised look as Cid tosses the remaining paper bag through the air, which she hastily catches in both hands. Looking as unbothered as ever, Cid tells her to take it because she should relax a bit. Holding the food tightly against her chest, Rose feels a surge of warmth and smiles gently with a slight blush, whispering her thanks to him.
The next day, morning light illuminates the sprawling grounds of the Spellsword Academy. Inside his quiet dormitory room, Cid holds a glass of water, contemplating yesterday's encounter, and thinking something was off about the student president, but concluding he just thought she was hungry, so he gave her his sandwich and hoped she liked it. Suddenly, a loud bang echoes through the room as the door slams open and a light-haired classmate bursts in, frantically waving a newspaper and yelling that Cid needs to wake up because shit just went down, revealing out on the grounds that dust swirls behind Rose as she flees into the distance with her longsword drawn, having officially become a fugitive after stabbing her fiancé.
Wait, no. The classmate bursts in and yells, "Shit just went down." And then, out on the grounds, dust swirls behind Rose as she flees with her sword drawn, having officially become a fugitive after stabbing her fiancé. Actually, let's just say the light-haired classmate bursts in yelling, "Shit just went down." And out on the grounds, Rose flees into the distance with her sword drawn after stabbing her fiancé. The student president Rose had become a fugitive after stabbing her fiancé. Yo, chat, let's recap this absolute circus of an episode, starting in the royal lounge where our favorite Soon Princess Alexia snaps open a paper and cries out at the shocking headline detailing Rose's supposed crimes. She sits on a soft cushion, gripping the edges, while wondering what the hell made Rose do this in the first place. But her elf roommate, Bookworm Senpai Beta, just sips tea neutrally, explaining that after stabbing her fiancé, Rose bolted north and probably got trapped by border security. Soon Princess instantly drops her teacup, yelling she never even heard Rose had a fiancé. So the elf drops the name of the victim with a deadpan gaze. Doem Ketsu-hat. The princess just squints and repeats the name skeptically. And Bookworm Senpai calmly sips, noting that, fortunately, the guy survived without fatal injuries. Soon Princess rests her chin, acknowledging he lived, but pondering how, given Rose's god-tier swordsmanship, he must be pretty skilled himself. But then she gets intense, saying stabbing a noble means severe punishment, so they gotta find her before it's too late. Bookworm Senpai stands up to temper her, saying they should refrain from jumping into action so rashly, which instantly triggers the princess to scream and ask if she's being called a rash blockhead. The elf calmly sips her tea, saying it's just important to calm down sometimes, making the princess lean in aggressively and demand she say it straight to her face. Suddenly, the elf breaks character into this cringy, trembling, innocent damsel act, whispering that she's not thinking her highness is a lousy, thoughtless blockhead, literally wailing while Soon Princess gives her the most deadpan, unimpressed stare ever. But then Soon Princess gets thoughtful, suspecting Rose is just trying to protect them from the fallout, and affirms their bond by declaring that comrades never abandon each other. Bookworm Senpai whimpers she'll do her best to gather info, and the princess admits she does view the elf as a comrade, despite her vexing personality, praising her for grasping the Diabolos cult intel before anyone else. The elf just smiles, teasing that she happens to know someone of exceptional character. Meanwhile, cut to the God of War arena, where our boy Cid, aka Edgelord Senpai, sits in the stands, internally sweating bullets, because he's basically speedrunning a mob quest and would literally rather be taking a shit right now. He notes that his buddy Hiro is pretty diligent for watching the qualifiers, but the blonde just lectures him that a student can learn from this, earning a grumble from Cid to stop calling him King Dung.
Hiyoro smugly explains he's gathering battle data to calculate possibilities for his bets, making Cid realize learning is just an excuse for degenerate gambling. Internally, Cid is panicking because in his past life, he mained a squishy mage build in a generic MMO and got absolutely deleted by a low-level aggro mob because he forgot to check his aggro radius. So his current survival strategy is strictly min-maxing his background NPC stats to avoid drawing aggro, which is why he's entering round 3 as Jimina. Hiyoro hits Hiyoro for useful data, but the degenerate just rambles about strong fighters and hot women until Cid tells him to shut up. Hiyoro keeps droning on about his earnings, while Cid's mind wanders to a chuny vision of himself as a mastermind, thinking about how he yeeted his way through the first 2 rounds without spectators, but now needs to take his "that dude is dead" meat act seriously for the cameras. Suddenly, a flamboyant step announces Goldo, who addresses Hiyoro about his notes. Hiyoro shouts that it's the undefeated legend, Goldo Kenmeki, but the guy in the ornate armor just laughs and says to call him the ever-victorious Golden Dragon. Cid stares blankly and asks who Dad is, prompting Hiyoro to grab his collar and ask if he's retarded. Hiyoro explains that Goldo is a world-famous fighter who has never lost a match, and the Sparkle Edgelord praises Hiyoro while mentioning his own data-gathering routine, declaring that victory will always be his. While Hiyoro gets stars in his eyes, Goldo offers to teach his guaranteed victory theory, and Hiyoro excitedly agrees, completely forgetting his boredom. But then Cid just instantly vanishes from the stands to prep for his match, making Goldo blink and Hiyoro realize he's gone. Hiyoro just shrugs it off and dismisses him as King Dung again. Down on the floor, the announcer booms the start of match 12, pitting Jimina against the massive Gonzalez. Goldo starts his analysis, explaining that a veteran's strength can be guessed from their aura and muscle balance, and even points out Gonzalez's chipped blade as a sign of experience. After bringing all the info together, Goldo activates a scouter eye device to measure battle power, announcing it's 1364. Hiyoro gasps in confusion at the new terminology, so Goldo explains the quantitative value, then turns his attention to Jimina. Hiyoro trembles as the numbers appear, and Goldo yells in utter shock that the battle power is 3, claiming he's never seen a number so low, and that it goes dimensions below small fry. Goldo laughs at Jimina's weakness, claiming even a baby is stronger, and Hiyoro agrees the victory is obvious. Goldo predicts it'll be over in an instant, as Gonzalez lunges aggressively, but Jimina remains perfectly still, his eyes narrowing with sharp focus. Then, with a loud bonk and thunk, Gonzalez is instantly floored. The crowd drops into a stunned silence, while Annerose, nicknamed Retired Senpai, and the spectators watch with wide-eyed disbelief. The announcer stutters, unable to process the result as he tries to declare the winner, before finally booming that the victor is Jimina Senin. Angry gamblers start shouting for their money back, and Hiyoro asks Goldo what the hell happened. The Sparkle Edgelord closes his eyes smugly to save face, excusing that fate can be whimsical, and claims he predicted it all along, telling Hiyoro to just wait for matches with sure outcomes. Goldo then announces his own next match against Jimina, making Hiyoro shout in excitement as Goldo strikes a theatrical pose with his billowing cape, asking if Hiyoro has reached the solution to the victory formula. Cid eventually returns, internally thinking that Goldo's MC aura is way too strong and annoying, and when Hiyoro tries to get him to bet all his belongings on tomorrow's match, Cid just passes. The next day arrives, and Annerose sits in the bleachers deep in thought, until Quentin, a large bald guy, approaches and talks about the coincidence. He asks if she's there for the match, and they sit together on the stone tiers. Eyepatch Grump mentions he watched the fight against Gonzalez and asks what she thinks about it. Annerose notes she's discarded her title and is just Annerose now, while the Grump growls that the result didn't sit well, insisting Gonzalez would never mess up like that. He suspects Jimina used a forbidden artifact, and Annerose doesn't deny it, revealing she doesn't believe he won just because of luck or a trip. She recalls a moment before the fall where she saw his hand moving with incredible speed, and Eye Patch Grump demands to know what he actually did, prompting her to say she expects to find out today against Goldo. She remembers Goldo's flamboyant victories and admits she never defeated him across 3 past matches, shocking the Grump. She corrects him, explaining she never actually got to fight him because Goldo only fights people he can easily beat, acting as a master of image manipulation by judging strength and forfeiting if he'd lose to stay the undefeated legend. Eye Patch Grump realizes this and exclaims they can't count on Goldo's actual strength, making Annerose wonder if his eyes have finally met their match, since his true strength is just judging others.
Down in the arena, Jimina stands in the center, and Eye Patch Grump smirks as the match begins, saying this is getting fun. Goldo faces Jimina, mentioning his fans and his friend's massive bet, while Hiyoro cheers wildly with playing cards. The Sparkle Edgelord launches a massive attack with a roar, yelling he'll finish it in a moment.
But Jimina just stands completely motionless and unfazed in the center of the explosive crater. A sharp grin spreads across the youth's face as his eye glows, internally thinking it's about time to tear off the golden dragon's plating, proving that when you min-max your edgelord build to the absolute limit, you just one-shot the final boss of the tournament arc.
Down in the dusty Coliseum courtyard, the ultimate tournament showdown kicks off as Goldo Kinmeki, our local gold-plated Sparkle Edgelord, charges forward to delete our boy Jimina with a lethal opening strike. The announcer goes wild as Goldo thunders across the tiles, prompting the Peanut Gallery, led by a boastful Quentin on the sidelines, to smugly declare that Jimina has 0 evasion frames left, while the resident analytical tryhard Annerose silently doubts this premature call and narrows her eyes to catch the action. A deafening metallic clang echoes when Jimina lazily holds his sword vertically to parry the blow. Goldo's face completely breaks as his blade gets hard stopped, leaving the legendary warrior frozen like a laggy NPC as he internally panics about being wide open to a counterattack.
But instead of punishing the mistake, Jimina just stands there with his sword hand wobbling like a total noob, looking completely checked out and ready to go home. This total lack of respect breaks Goldo's brain, making him angrily ask if Jimina is just trolling. Up in the stands, Quentin literally jumps out of his seat, screaming about what just happened, while Annerose casually claims she saw the interaction just barely. She breaks down the frame data. Goldo aimed a pixel-perfect strike at the throat, but Jimina casually cracked his neck to dodge it, leaving Quentin screaming that a flawless RNG accident like that is mathematically impossible. Back on the tiles, Goldo tries to salvage his ego by claiming Jimina just threw away his once-in-a-lifetime win condition, but Jimina maintains his cold, deadpan poker face. Frustrated that Jimina didn't even notice the opening, Goldo taps into his ultimate mana reserves, erupting into a violent storm of lightning, to unleash his cringe-titled God-slaying Golden Dragon Flash Strike before leaping forward with a roar. Annerose and Quentin both gasp as a physical dragon materializes, and Goldo laughs maniacally, yelling that Jimina's power level is over 4,300. Then, boom! A massive explosion rocks the arena, and Goldo is sent flying backward through the air by some unseen force, crashing hard into the dirt. As Annerose clutches her chest in disbelief, and Jimina's idiot friend Hirogari literally shakes while holding his ruined betting papers, the announcer screams that Jimina Senin is the victor. While Jimina stands over his unconscious opponent like a boss, Quentin shakes his fist in a massive cope seethe and mauled fit. But a pensive Annerose drops a bombshell. She thinks Jimina actually just sneezed. A baffled Quentin screams in confusion as Annerose imagines the physics of a sneeze-powered swing completely destroying a massive magical dragon. Realizing that while Goldo was strong, Jimina is a terrifying raid boss in disguise who is way stronger than anyone realizes. Jimina just stands there looking emo, driving a frustrated Quentin to cross his arms and vow to personally unmask Jimina's true power in the qualifiers. Annerose, however, is having a full existential crisis,
standing in the crowd with growing panic before letting out a literal scream of terror. Naturally, the hype spreads, and the crowd bets all their money on Quentin, only for the announcer to immediately scream that Quentin got one-shotted off-screen, leaving Jimina standing bored over another folded body. Stepping out of the arena, where salty bettors are currently crying over their empty wallets, Cid mutters to himself about why that random old guy had such a massive grudge against him, before sliding into the quiet hallway with a not bad. Suddenly, Annerose blocks his path, admitting she never expected a literal nobody to make the finals. But Cid just drops an ice-cold line about how his victory was never in question. She accepts the burn, but summons a crackling spark of magic on her finger to issue a warning for their upcoming match, pointing it at his face to declare she has completely downloaded his playstyle. Cid, being the theater kid he is, just stares back with a blank face and tries to pull a cool guy move by casually gliding past her. When she angrily demands to know what's so funny, Cid unleashes a manic laugh, screams, "Hell yeah!" and unlatches a heavy metal limiter from his arm. The weighted gear hits the stone floor with a massive, thudding crash, leaving Annerose in utter disbelief that he had been fighting with limiters. As she covers her mouth in pure shock at his hidden power, unleashing his inner edgelord, Cid smirks and tells her the shackles are off and the game is over, emitting a terrifying aura that literally makes her break into a cold sweat. Desperate to save face as he walks away, Annerose yells for him to wait and quickly unclips her own secret weights to prove she can do the same trope, but Cid just hits her with a deadpan, and walks off with his hands in his pockets, mentally flagging her as an absolute weirdo. The scene shifts to the Academy campus, where the peaceful vibe is shattered by Hiyoro running up with a wanted poster for Princess Rose. When Hiyoro tries to recruit him for the 10 million bounty, Cid casually declines to read his book, prompting a panicked Hiyoro to shake in terror over his debts. But before Cid can complain, the dorm lady pops in to announce his scary older sister Claire is waiting outside. Instantly, Cid's internal pain in the ass-o-meter redlines, sweat dripping down his face as he realizes his survival is at stake. He immediately turns to Hiyoro, declares he is 100% down for the princess hunt, and dives straight out of the second-story window while Hiyoro praises their unbreakable bond of friendship. Meanwhile, Claire stands at the iron gates, unaware her brother just defenestrated himself as the dormitory stands quiet under the sky. Hiding out in a luxury hotel lobby to escape his sister's relentless tracking, Cid decides to kill some time instead of actually doing his job. When the beautiful notes of Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata stop him in his tracks, he narrows his eyes, wondering how Earth classical music got plagiarized in this fantasy world, before realizing with dread exactly who is behind the keys. Sure enough, he spots Epsilon playing the grand piano, and when he calls her name, she stops to give him a flustered, heavily made-up smile. Over tea and macarons, Cid asks if that was Moonlight Sonata, and Epsilon proudly confirms it's her favorite piece he ever taught her. As Cid nostalgically smiles, thinking playing piano under the moon is peak shadow Eminence behavior, he flashes back to his past life. Back on Earth, his parents forced him to practice, but he realized he could use the piano as a perfect excuse to avoid social expectations and hang out with others. He realized he could use music to spice up the ambiance of his future battles and make himself look incredibly cool under a spotlight, leading him to practice until his fingers literally fell off so he could min-max his aesthetic. In the present, Epsilon gushes about how she won awards using his stolen repertoire and mentions she's heading to Oriana for a concert, secretly plotting to do some shadow work there. When Cid asks if she knows where the runaway Princess Rose is, Epsilon explains Beta is handling it, but suggests she's hiding out in the sewers, which is plenty of info for him. Cid thanks her, drops a casual, "You look stunning" compliment, and leaves Epsilon blushing furiously as she celebrates a massive victory over her rival Beta. Meanwhile,
Deep in the dark, dripping sewers, an exhausted Princess Rose leans against the damp brick wall, wondering if stabbing her brainwashed father's fiancé was actually the right move to save him from the puppet master Doem. Clutching a book with an M logo, she tearfully wonders what Cid thinks of her and if he is searching for her, when a sudden sharp pain hits her chest. Pulling back her collar, her eyes widen in horror at the black, vein-like rot spreading across her skin as she realizes the curse of the possessed is progressing. Realizing her dreams of a happy ending are completely ruined, she weeps and apologizes to Cid, only for the faint, echoing sound of a piano to cut through the gloom. Drawn to the melody, she stumbles into a massive cathedral hall to find a mysterious silhouette playing Moonlight Sonata on a grand piano. Deep within the dilapidated ruins of an abandoned church, Rose Oriana's heavy black boots clacked against the cracked stone floor as she wandered through the cavernous gloom. Tilted in pure serenity, her head followed the haunting melody of Moonlight Sonata floating through the wreckage. The melancholic tune instantly triggered a painful flashback of her raising her blade against Doem, making her clutch her chest as she remembered her tragic defeat and his arrogant smirk threatening her father, leaving her feeling like a solitary, defeated figure. Stepping up to a massive set of ornate wooden doors, she knew the ultimate soundtrack was right behind them. A single shaft of moonlight pierced the dusty interior, leading her to push the door open and peek inside at a pair of gloved hands executing high-tier piano mechanics across the ivory keys. It was none other than the ultimate Chunibyo, Lord Shadow himself, sitting beneath a shattered stained glass window while casting a calm side-eye glance from under his hood. Naturally, Rose gasped out his name, utterly spellbound by his dark fantasy drip. Shadow suddenly executed a dramatic pause when a rattle echoed, stopping his recital to hit her with a formal, theatrical bow. Rose was so captivated, she literally blushed and started clapping, praising it as the single best rendition of the song she had ever heard. Standing tall in his dark cloak, Shadow hit her with the ultimate anime protagonist prompt, asking what she intended to do. Her heart went into hyperdrive under his soul-piercing gaze, as her posture slumped under the heavy weight of her past failures, desperately clutching her uniform. Shadow then flexed a swirling sphere of dark, crackling energy above his palm, asking if her fight was truly over, or if she still possessed the will to grind for stats. Promising her pure, unadulterated power, Rose stared in utter shock at her potential main quest shortcut, though Shadow casually reminded her that the choice was entirely hers. Right on cue, generic church fodder trash mobs marched outside shouting that they sensed her mana. Realizing her pursuers had caught up, Rose tightened up with anxiety, gripped her outfit, and screamed at the top of her lungs that she wanted power. Shadow hit her with a confident grin and a very well as he detonated his dark energy sphere. The raw kinetic force yeeted Rose across the room, while Shadow hit her with a parting Dark Lord quote about proving her worth and how true strength is all about how you wield your build. A blinding flash of white light erupted from Rose, just as the church mobs burst in with weapons drawn. Fully buffed and tranquil as Shadow's mana cleansed her cursed mark, Rose unleashed massive radiant light slashes that violently obliterated the attackers. Wiping a splash of liquid off her cheek, she finally grasped that Shadow had been soloing this secret war alone, all along. The musical masterpiece wasn't just flair, it was his literal soul, making her realize he wasn't the darkness, but the single shining light standing against it. Meanwhile, down in the damp, gross sewer tunnels beneath the city, Princess Alexia Midgar and Beta, disguised in her basic author Natsume cosplay, were playing a riveting game of dungeon crawling. Alexia dropped string like a total rookie following a tutorial guide to mark their path, which made Beta internally roll her eyes and click her tongue in utter disdain. When called out, Beta instantly swapped to her polite girl fake personality to whine about searching for half a day. Alexia brushed it off with royal arrogance, threatening to leave her behind, leaving Beta internally grinding her teeth, while reminding herself she was on a babysitting quest. As they walked, they dropped lore about Oriana's political corruption and how Doem was secretly working with the church. Beta agreed, and Alexia lamented that they lacked hard evidence to bust the church without starting a holy war, their boots clicking loudly as they navigated the brick path. Suddenly, Beta's high-level sensors picked up a wild mana surge.
Both women froze on the spot, and after Beta confirmed the massive magical energy, they sprinted toward the ornate double doors of the ruined church. Alexia kicked open the door, screaming Rose's name, finding Rose standing alone in the melancholic hall before a ruined stained glass window. Rose calmly acknowledged Alexia's grand entry, leaving Alexia completely shocked and stammering. Holding a bloody blade as drops splattered onto the stone, Rose warned her that getting involved was a terrible idea, and accepted her new villain arc amidst the pile of defeated church fodder. Alexia panicked, demanding answers and bringing up their solemn pact at the sanctuary, but Rose had already spec-stumped her new power to walk her own path. Enraged by the cryptic response, Alexia drew her sword and declared she was beating the plot details out of her directly. Alexia launched a horizontal slash, but Rose blocked the heavy blow, causing sparks to fly in a metallic clang. Rose was legitimately shocked by how much Alexia had leveled up since their last spar, while Alexia gritted her teeth, realizing Rose's new stance was a direct copy-paste of Shadow's broken sword style. But Rose's raw mana output was simply off the charts. Rose blasted Alexia back with an explosive burst, knocking the princess out cold onto the dusty floor. Leaving her friend unconscious, Rose offered a polite, respectful bow and casually walked out. Shadow Garden's resident author Beta voiced a soft "good luck" from the shadows, completely terrifying Rose, who hadn't even noticed the stealth-maxed scholar standing right there. Beta assured her she wasn't going to interrupt her quest, smirking that their endgame goals aligned, and that she was stuck playing nanny to the unconscious princess. Rose stepped out into the quiet, while Beta adjusted her glasses, realizing Shadow had personally handed out a mid-game power-up to Rose. Gazing up at the stained glass, Beta pondered Shadow's divine master plan as the morning sun began to illuminate the academy outside. Over at the Midgar Academy dorms, the bright morning sun lit up the classic campus grounds. But inside Cid Kagenou's small room, an absolute horror show was taking place. His violently aggressive Brokon sister Claire was trembling with lethal yandere intent, threatening to beat him into a literal lump of meat for ditching her. She grabbed his neck and shoulders, pulling his head back to interrogate him about standing her up for half a day. Claire immediately mounted Cid like a top-tier grappling boss, pinning him flat to the floor while threatening to choke him out. Flashback Cid remembered her jumping right through his glass window like a wild gorilla, while back in reality, Cid decided his best mob defense mechanism was to pretend to be asleep while she squeezed his throat. Claire asserted absolute dominance atop him, while Cid begged for mercy. She pulled out a golden ticket, which made Cid's eyes widen in confusion as she revealed it was a VIP ticket to the God of War festival. Claire sighed at his dead-average mob grades, telling him to watch top-tier fighters, so he might actually gain some XP. To drive the point home, she lifted him by his collar like a rag doll before letting him drop. Claire nonchalantly mentioned she was taking Rose's slot in the tournament, and the moment Cid started to say he had no idea, she cut off his oxygen supply with another chokehold. She fiercely interrogated him on her birthday and tournament stats, threatening his life if he ever forgot. Satisfied with his frantic nodding, she pointed him toward the door and demanded he watch her win. Cid speed walked out the door as fast as his feet could carry him. Cut to his destination. Cid arrived at the venue, where an exhausted young noble was slumped in a plush armchair inside an ultra-glitzy VIP booth. Panicking as he realized Claire had accidentally gifted him a front row pass to the absolute highest tier of high society royalty,
Cid almost threw up when Princess Iris Midgar herself addressed him, activating his ultimate mob foo exit routine. Cid babbled an apology and tried to physically sprint back to the mud where mobs belong, but Princess Iris trapped him, smiling sweetly as she pointed out his assigned seat was right next to hers. As Cid sat down, completely drained, beside the exhausted, light-haired boy, Iris casually chatted about his relationship with Alexia. When Cid described it as a throw money, pick up money dog dynamic, a side-tailed noble girl completely misunderstood it as wholesome puppy playtime. Cid just accepted his dog fate as the high caste elites glittered with main character aura around him, trying to steer the conversation toward his secret Smurf alter ego Jimina. Cid listened as Iris praised the elven prodigy Annerose, while the military elites cheered Iris on as the true champ. Cid tentatively brought up Jimina, but Iris barely knew him. The elite military man and woman instantly roasted Jimina as a talentless, lucky amateur who didn't belong on stage. Cid's internal mob persona instantly exploded in maniacal joy. Getting trash-talked was the absolute perfection he needed to set up his ultimate undercover flex. Iris then mentioned a legendary figure outside the bracket, the original war god, Beatrix, showing a vision of the iconic elven warrior. Having no clue who this lore NPC was, Cid deployed a robotic, tactical nod to pretend he was completely in the loop. The stone stadium arena is popping off as the crowd roars under a clear sky. On the tiles, Cid Kagenou is basically playing a high-level RPG on easy mode, clashing blades with some armored scrub. The guy is sweating through his plate mail, crying about how he can't lose the first round, but Claire just hits him with the ultimate, "You're okay, but my brother is the real MC" line, before deleting him with a blood-spraying downward strike. She catches the W and looks toward the VIP section, basically begging her little brother to take notes on her elite gameplay. Meanwhile, Cid is pulling the most cliché late-for-school trope ever, sprinting through the hallways with toast in his mouth because his Jimina alt account is up next. Suddenly, a mysterious high-level boss figure steps out, and Cid's like, "Wait, who's this?" It's Beatrix, and she's out here sniffing the air for the scent of an elf. She pulls her hood back to reveal she's essentially an alpha recolor searching for her late sister's kid. When she asks if he's seen her, Cid realizes she's basically an alpha clone. She gets way too close for personal space comfort, asking if he's sure. So Cid activates his mob character defense, flailing around and fake tripping like a total klutz. He sits on the ground in a staged panic, and Beatrix totally buys the act, thinking he's just a level 1 peasant. She asks his name, reads his palm like a fortune teller, and gives him a "you'll be strong" participation trophy comment before vanishing. Cid watches her leave, thinking she's a beast, and gives himself a gold star for his piss in my pants performance, though he knows he still needs to grind his acting stats. Up in the VIP lounge, Princess Iris is wondering if Cid's stomach is okay, while Doem Lord Cid Ketsu-hat slides into her personal space. Iris is surprised, but Doem just wants to sit next to her and gossip about his missing fiancé and the ill king of Oriana. He's busy scheming about allied bonds, while Iris looks down at Jimina, noting his total dead-inside doll eyes. She tries to analyze him, calling his posture weak, while Doem thinks Annerose will stomp. However, Iris identifies that Jimina has that main character confidence. She sees zero hesitation in his messy-haired gaze and bets on his inevitable victory. The fight starts, and Annerose immediately lunges like a total sweat. She thinks she's parsed his speed build and assumes he's a sword skill noob who just relies on frames. She coils her body to rush him and visualizes the whole fight in her head like a 5D chess mental sim. Back on the arena floor, the mental duel reaches its peak as Annerose imagines landing a downward blow and sweep, generating a massive shockwave. Iris and Doem even narrate her imagined win, while Jimina loses his footing. She's smiling because she thinks she's secured the bag, but then her sim glitches as Jimina delivers a crushing slash that sends her reeling. The imaginary spectators roar, and Doem's ghost voice says it's over. Annerose snaps her eyes open in shock, panicking in a white void because he's gone. Cid's calm voice echoes behind her, telling her it was merely an afterimage. As his silhouette heads for the exit in her mind, she snaps back to reality, realizing Jimina is actually looming right behind her like a jump scare. She blocks an explosive clash of steel that slides her across the tiles, and finally admits the guy is absolutely cracked. The crowd starts whispering in disbelief.
While Annerose tries to rely on her veteran XP and long-term experience, she tries to time a counterattack for when he disappears again and leaps for victory. But in reality, her blade just hits the stone because Cid hasn't actually moved from his starting position. Doem and Iris watch in total shock. She realizes she missed because he stopped just out of her hitbox with insane precision. Then, as the sun gleams off his blade, Cid pulls a total anime flex by executing a wide, sweeping arc. He carves deep, glowing gashes into the floor, and Annerose can only marvel at his beautiful form. The stadium goes wild, and even Doem admits he's strong. Iris is swooning over his beautiful unknown moves, while Doem realizes Jimina was faking his posture the whole time. He asks if Iris is ready to fight him next, and she's got that I'm the captain now energy, claiming he's not on her level yet. She leaves to prep, while Doem stays behind, theorizing that Jimina is some behind-the-scenes operative or Blood Queen kin. He wonders just who the guy is. Moving to the stadium's quiet stone interior, Jimina stops in the shadows before Annerose catches up to him. She admits she got absolutely gapped and thanks him for the ego check. They share a respect the grind handshake. She offers him a job in her empire, but Cid hits her with the ultimate Chunibyo line, claiming that world is too bright for him, as he walks into a literal white light, leaving her heartbroken and officially part of his fan club.
The video ends here, but the story isn't over yet. Like the video if you're ready for the next part.